let's talk about the San Francisco 49ers and my guy, Mr. Irrelevant.
Yeah.
Jimmy might come back. Maybe not. Who knows? My question is, do they need him? Do they have enough? And I've been thinking about it for 4 days. I went through some recent NFL history, just trying to figure out how conceivable it is. But first, before we do that, let me hear your take on what you're hearing from the San Francisco side.
Yeah, and I thought you did a nice job Monday morning, just giving like the big picture on who Purdy is, and Sal was pushing back. Are you still talking about Brock Purdy? It is a cool story. Obviously, you gave the high school and the college story of it, but he does have 41 career starts, owns all the records. And in the combine process, obviously, I work for the NFL network on the draft. I have to go deep dive on all these guys, and there was some buzz around him. I think there was a surprise that he slipped to the 7th round, and certainly the last pick. Now, some things to take away from that. The way it went in San Francisco this offseason is Jimmy G wasn't around. So you had Trey Lance, and that was all the focus. But the number 2 during camp was Brock Purdy. So he was getting a lot of reps, and he was also playing on the scout team. So a lot of that stuff with, Fred Warner and Eric Armstead and Nick Bosa, like breathing down his neck and getting their number 1 reps, was with Brock Purdy as the scout team guy. So you'd hear some buzz that like he was playing pretty good. Then Jimmy comes back, and now Brock Purdy's irrelevant. He's a practice squad 3rd guy, whatever. Trey Lance goes down. Brock Purdy again is the number 2 guy, and he earned a lot of respect from those defensive players. So part of the big obstacle when you get these young quarterbacks is that the rest of the team is like, who the hell is this guy? I live it all on the field, and I've played my whole career to get to this point, and you're, as a team, going to put this guy on the field? That's not the vibe. And the team backed it up by A, not putting even a waiver claim in for Baker Mayfield. B, not calling up Cam Newton and Ben Roethlisberger.
You know what? You know why? Because they saw the tape on those guys, their last few starts. Like, Baker Mayfield is not better than Brock Purdy at this point. He's not.
And he hasn't
Cam
been
Newton
there.
Was terrible for 3 years.
Yeah, and those guys haven't been there since May, learning the offense, sitting in the room with Brian Greasy, who is the quarterback's coach, and learning from the Kyle Shanahan offense what they need at the quarterback position. Look, he's 6'1". He's a big guy. He can move. And the words that I listen to are the players. And, you hear during the week that he called a timeout without Kyle Shanahan calling the timeout on the sideline, and the team kind of liked it. They're like, all right, like the rookie. And then you hear Fred Warner come out and say, he played against us the entire year. He's our scout team quarterback. He's facing the number 1 defense. And then Trent Williams told Bridget Condon from the NFL Network that, the stuff he's got is Peyton Manning traits. And you're like, okay, slow down. But he means cerebral stuff, like above the neck, all that stuff, that the guy is smart enough to not kill you in a big spot. Now,
and he's got he had a little charisma and a little swagger too last week. That's what, he definitely did not have deer in the headlights. It was the opposite.
No, totally. And I've gone through, I've got a whole research department that works on our show, and I really put the screws to him this week. And I'm like, guys, we got to do something on Purdy, and historically speaking, who's done it? And, there's no precedent for a quarterback after Thanksgiving who's never played before coming in and doing this. Like that, there's nothing even close.
There's some in the past. There's some Jeff Hostetler.
Yeah.
So going way back. There was Earl Morrall.
Do you want
There's
me
been a couple. Yeah, give us a couple of them.
It started with Tobin Rote and the 57 Lions. We're not going to go back all the way there, but you said Earl Morrall, and then, Doug Williams only started 2 games for that Washington team, and Jay Schrager was the guy, but in the final regular season game, they benched him for Williams, and he goes on the run. I mentioned Hostetler. Foles came in week 14 after the ACL, so that was that. And then
Brock Osweiler kind of counts because he came in week 10, but he was out for the playoffs.
But the most comparable situation, and it's not Trent Dilfer because he was a first-round pick and he came in after 9 weeks, is Sean King when he was with the Buccaneers.
Yeah.
All right.
What was that, 99?
That was 99. They didn't finish the job, but Sean King came in after Trent Dilfer got injured in week 13. And Eric Zier was the number 2 for that Buccaneers squad. And both of those guys go down. So you lose both of them. And it's Dilfer and Zier. They're not able to go. And Sean King comes in as a rookie out of Tulane. And he won some big games. He won a playoff game.
I bet on him. I won some money on Sean King. I finally remember him.
They were a Burt Emanuel play away, which they
Right.
changed the rule, and a Ricky Prohl catch away.
But also very similar to this Niners team.
And
all
who was
defense, just
who
don't
was the
hurt me,
defensive
Sean
captain?
King.
Who was the defensive captain of that team?
Who was
John
it?
Lynch. John Lynch, who is now the GM of the 49ers. And I texted Lynchy this week and I'm like, is there any Sean King parallel? He goes, I know the Sean King story very well. I'm not going to make a parallel to that, but off the record, now it's on the record. He's like, I hear, I'm picking up what you're dropping. Basically, like, this could be that in a lot of ways. And they've got the support of the front office, the coaching staff, and the players. And I'm not picking them to win the Super Bowl, but I'm not picking against them to at least make a little run here and do something. And I think this is the first big test this week.
There's two teams in the 21st century that at least have the blueprint for how this could work. I went through everybody.
Yeah,
and
I don't
think I don't want to go into the 20th century because I just think football really changes. And I think once we get in the 21st, at least it's a little more like what it is now. 2000 Ravens, you mentioned. Dilfer's playoff stats are unbelievable. First of all, in the regular season, they scored 29 touchdowns, 30 plus points 4 times. So they weren't like impotent offensively. But you get to the playoffs.
Well, wait, the 2000 Ravens, they bench Tony Banks after 8 games and then throw Dilfer in.
They weren't completely impotent, though, is my point. But they get to the playoffs and they're basically like, Dilfer, just fucking steer the car. He throws 73 passes total in the playoffs. Wow. He's 35 for 73. He's 590 yards total in the playoffs. 4 games, not 3. Right? It wasn't just they didn't have the bias. So the 4 playoff games, he's less than 150 a game. 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, 1 fumble. Their scores in the 4 games, they beat Denver 21-3. They beat Tennessee 24-10. They beat Oakland 16-3. And they beat the Giants 34-7 where they got some defensive stuff. And I think if you're going to make the case for the Niners, the playoffs are looking like that, where it's like 21-3, 20-14, 17-10. That's how it has to be. And could they do it with Brock Purdy? So here's the other one.
Well, wait. I mean, you remember in that thing, like Dilfer goes 7-1 to end the regular season. They go 4-0. But if you remember, Shannon Sharp had a big game against Denver. That was the big story there. But like Siragusa sits on Rich Gannon's leg in the first drive of the game in the AFC Championship game, and that's their defense. And then Jermaine Lewis runs back the kick in the Super Bowl. That's the special teams. That's what the Niners need. You're spot on.
The defense, I think, has a chance to be almost as good as that. That Ravens team was, that 00 team was ridiculous. That was probably the best defense of this century. So the other team is the 2015 Broncos. We mentioned Osweiler earlier.
Yeah.
32 touchdowns that year for them. They scored 30 plus twice in 16 games. Osweiler probably played 7 games. They finished the year, this is crazy, 24th offense in DVOA, first in defense. 28th pass offense. 31 turnovers for the season. There were 2 turnovers a game. Manning, they get to the playoffs. They only have to play 3 games because they got to bye. Manning's 51 for 92 in 3 games. 539 yards. That's about 175 a game, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, 2 fumbles. And the scores were Pittsburgh, they beat 23-16. They beat New England 20-18, which is still an awful Patriots loss. I never want to talk about that game again. Carolina, they win in the Super Bowl 24-10. So they scored 23, 20, and 24. And I think if you're making the case for the Niners and Brock Purdy, it's that Broncos team more than anyone because Manning was pretty much done at that point.
And he
could still audible at the line,
Yeah.
but he had no arm strength anymore. Purdy can at least throw the ball better than him.
That Super Bowl run, I followed the Broncos for Fox. They just like kind of embedded me with them, and I went to all their playoff games. And what was really interesting was everyone makes it about Peyton Manning, and that was DeMarcus Ware's Super Bowl run in that building. Like that was all. Let's win one for DeMarcus. Like he was the leader on defense, and the defense was what was doing it. And in those playoff games, you remember, obviously Dante Scarnecchia wasn't the coach that one year, and the Patriots offensive line was obliterated by that Broncos defensive line. But Manning had those 2 touchdown passes to Owen Daniels early in that
2
game.
good throws. And
just 2 passes. That's all he needed, those 2. And then it was like defense, take it away. And remember, Gronk had that crazy drive at the end and the catches. And
Brady got concussed in that game too. They'll never admit it, but Brady got crushed in that game and was in a fog for 3 quarters.
And then they go to the Super Bowl and Cam gets knocked around by Von Miller and Dexter Jackson, and the defense led the way.
So, but that Broncos team finished 15-4. Probably the worst offensive team that's won the title in the last 15
Recent
years
history,
since the rules
sure.
changed. Yeah, since they basically changed the contact rules on pass interference, stuff like that. The other thing with them was they caught the conference and the league at the right time, right? It's a Patriots team where they had some injuries that year, and then Brady gets hurt in the game. The NFC was kind of goofy. Like Carolina made the Super Bowl. Carolina went 15-1 that year.
Do you remember the NFC
And you go
Championship
back
game?
and you're like, how did that team go 15-1?
Carolina, Arizona, NFC Championship game.
Right. Carson
Right?
Palmer.
Yes.
So, you think like this year, like moving forward to the West this year, Philly's the only good team. So the question is, can they go into Philly and beat this team? And then the second question to that is, they have the perfect team to go into Philly and beat this team as long as Brock Purdy doesn't fuck it up. Like defensively, they can take away the run. They can rush Hurts. I do think Philly answered some questions in that Titans game that I at least I had. Can you do something different? They were like, yeah, we actually can. We're going to throw the ball this whole game. So I think they have a higher ceiling than maybe I thought a week ago. And they're still going to be favored. But I do think a great defense can go in and win anywhere. Cold weather, 20 degrees outside, but then you get Brock Purdy in 20-degree weather. My point is, I'm not writing off San Francisco yet. I still have them second.
Look, if any team is going to beat the Eagles, it's that kind of team that just takes the air completely out of the ball and says, yeah, you got a great offensive line, but we got a great defensive line. Like, if there's any unit in football that can go up against Jeff Stoutland's offensive line, it's Chris Kaceric's defensive line. And I would pay to see that ticket right there, those bodies clashing, because the Eagles' offensive line is by far the best at what they do. And the Niners' defensive line is by far the best at what they do. What I loved last week was the little story out of San Francisco was that in the Saturday night, pregame talk before this big showdown with the Dolphins, Kyle Shanahan kind of jokingly almost said, hey, defensive line, we need something out of you. The linebackers have been carrying you all season, and like called out, Nick Bosa.
I saw Bosa got mad, right?
And that wasn't like Bosa being like, busting chops elbow. Like he did not like it and did not like that. And he went and had 3.5 sacks, and Eric Armstead's just sucking up, offensive linemen while Bosa's running free. They are so good on defense and so good up front that they're going to be able to be competitive with anyone. And I look at the Eagles.
Certainly, Tua was seeing some ghosts last week. Now, granted, he was missing his tackles, but I went back and I watched some of the, because I watched it live, but then I went back and I watched some of it again. And there was some happy feet stuff going on by second half with him. It was like, holy shit, what's going on here?
I'd love for you to go on Twitter, which is often a hellscape, but go on Twitter and look at that moment where Tua starts the game with the Trent Sherfield touchdown. The amount of people being like, MVP, MVP, MVP. I work on a daily show. The balloon on the Tua thing has kind of been deflated. And
Joe Burrow kind of took it. He's like, hey, I'll take that. Thanks.
Tua's prime time this weekend against the Chargers. Everyone's going to be watching. And then Tua's on a Saturday night game against the Bills the following week. So I think the Tua, we're all going to be watching Tua. And we've already saw him last week. Watch him for the next 2 weeks. He can silence a lot of doubters, or he can prove a lot of doubters wrong or right.
I'll give him benefit of not having his tackles. That's the wrong team to not have your tackles again. One last thing on the Broncos. I mean, on the Niners. And I say this out of respect to Kyle Shanahan. Is there another coach in the league who would enjoy trying to win a Super Bowl more with Brock Purdy? Like, is there another coach in the league who can figure out how to use a mediocre to worse quarterback in the right ways with the offense they have and what they're trying to do? Like, all this guy has to do, just throw some quick bubble screens, throw some screens, just have poise. Don't get rid of it. He'll ask him to make 2 throws a game that actually are hard throws. Other than that, everything is going to be designed, scripted, thought out, and he'll just put this guy in a position to succeed. Deep down, I think he's probably like, I kind of like this. He'll never admit it.
We go back to Greek mythology. The word is hubris. A little bit of like this, like, you know what? I'm pretty good at what I do. And I don't think he's got that, because that's like a false sense of arrogance. But I think there is a bit of, hey, this is a challenge and I'm up for it. And if I go through Kyle's career, like, Matt Schaub was a good quarterback coming out of Virginia. I think Matt Schaub was awesome with Kyle in Houston. And like they got the very most out of him. And I remember when Kyle got the job in San Francisco, that was the Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Mitch Trubisky draft. And they traded out of the second pick and they took Solomon Thomas, and then they would take the linebacker Reuben Foster later on. And, no one really quite, they're like, all right, build it. And they rolled out Brian Hoyer week 1 as their starting quarterback. And in Kyle's head, it was like, we could be competitive with Brian Hoyer as our starter. We don't need a young guy. Like we'll be all right. But then they traded for Jimmy, and then they went and they traded all those picks for Trey Lance. I still think he's chasing that, like the dream Kyle Shanahan quarterback, when at the bottom line is his offense is good enough. Their blocking is good enough. And the running game with McCaffrey now. And of course,
I would say McCaffrey is more the dream Shanahan person than any quarterback, right?
Him and Debo together, using them the way
he's fallen in with that team was predictable, but it's still kind of amazing to watch. It honestly looks like he got dropped out of the sky for them. He looks great in the uniform.
I think he
different
deserves
things. How about when they run those little wheel routes with him? It's like, who's better at this specific thing than him?
It's funny, the NFL does their Pro Bowl games voting, and the votes come out and it's like the results, and it's all fans, so it's whatever. And Christian McCaffrey's number 4, and I'm thinking to myself, I love Josh Jacobs. I love Derrick Henry. Those guys, like what Christian McCaffrey's done to be traded and then mid-season be like, yep, pick up an offense, find myself involved.
Yeah,
like,
Swiss Army knife.
It's pretty incredible what he's done on an individual level, and I think they're using him great, and he's only going to get his workload increased, especially now with Mitchell out. I really like the Niners, and I think you're right. This is a weird year for the NFC. It's the Eagles who are looking amazing, but they haven't been there with Hurts yet in those big games where they've won. The Cowboys, who have not won a big game in decades. And then, of course, you've got this
I have them a notch
team.
lower. I don't trust the Cowboys. San Francisco's plus 450 on FanDuel. Minnesota, who you're about to talk about, is plus 650.
Can we do quick Vikings just overall?
Let's do that. Let's do that after the break. Last point, because we got to take a break.
Yeah.
We were kind of down on the quality of the teams this season. Right? It was like, what a weird season. Don't know what to make of it. There's no stability. And now it's like, man, if we got Kansas City, Cincinnati, and then Philly, San Francisco as our 2 conference title games, those games are fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Cincy KC is like the number 1 sign me up for that game now. I think that's supplanted Buffalo KC for me. Especially because Buffalo's losing Von Miller, some injuries in the secondary. We don't know what's wrong with Josh. I think Cincinnati is a safer bet to have an awesome game against Kansas City. Now, we'll see. Buffalo could prove me wrong in the next 2 weeks. But those 4 teams plus Buffalo as the wild card, those are 5 really good teams that I think would all be fun in the Super Bowl, right?
Let me tell you, we had Thanksgiving Day, which was like 3 really good matchups. And teams kind of figured themselves out. 42 million people watch the Giants and the Cowboys. On Christmas Eve, the Eagles play the Cowboys, which might decide the NFC East.
Holy shit.
That's going to be a massive number. And then a crazy stroke of good luck for, the Monday Night Football folks. And I know Disney and ESPN are on far better place with the NFL than they might have been a decade ago when they're getting a game like this. Buffalo, Cincinnati on a Monday night game, January 2nd. So we have 2 monster regular season games. By the way, that could
be for a 2 seed.
Could be for everything. It's great. So before we get to the playoffs, we still have those 2 massive regular season games. And that's not even including the week 18 slate, which is all the divisional battles that, it could be up for grabs in a lot of ways.